What, dude? I don't even know these dogs, man. Stop. Hi, I know your name's Leo. I just met these two dogs. What is going on? What do you see? I'm not even ready. Oh. Dude, I can't do this. What is it, dog? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start this. I've been invited to this farmhouse. He just introduced me, and she just introduced me. The wife and husband introduced me to their dog. What are you seeing? Dude. Okay, and so they invited me here because they're having issues. This is their property line ends. What is wrong with you? Look, there's movement. He's kicking up dirt. Okay, so she introduced me to her dogs, and so I went and got all my equipment. They had to leave for a soccer game. The story is they moved here 2 years ago. This field was empty when they moved in. It's surrounded by woods. Sorry, I'm not trying to move you that fast. There's the woods back there, and then it goes that way. And there's another set of woods, and if I could point you up over there, there's more woods. There's a farmhouse over that way, which is this is their property. So I'm gonna walk along this line of her property. But anyway, they're hearing voices. When they moved here 2 years ago, it was just a field, but they could see figures running through and going into the forest. Where the damn dogs go? Okay.
On the day it happened, I was hiking on a small trail alongside a stream off of a forest road in Lassen National Forest. There were a couple of cars along the road, so I thought it would be a safe place for me to hop onto a small trail. I like to hike in some odd places, practicing my navigation skills with a map and a compass, and my phone GPS app tracking my path. I like to pinpoint some unique land features on a topo map and go find them. I usually go with a group of orienteering friends, but that day I was hiking solo. When I'm alone, I don't go too far into the forest. However, the events of that day drove me deep into the forest. The stream was rather small compared to the actual stream bed, which was odd considering there had been a decent snowfall over the winter. I also noticed that there was a lot of algae in this stream, and a quarter mile in I could smell a rotting trout long before I came upon it, and there were pieces of trash littered along the stream. I also came across a few small dead animals near the stream as I walked along the trail. It was disgusting, but I assumed this was a popular area with teens or target shooters, and they probably left some trash behind, and I thought maybe the dead wildlife was leftovers from a young carnivore training session. I didn't know these were the warning signs of what I was walking into. About a mile in, the trail diverged from the stream and cut through the shrubs and trees. I was close to my destination, a spot along the stream that looked like it could possibly have a small waterfall. The trail turned left and it opened up to a large flat clearing. I stopped immediately, looking across the clearing. There was trash everywhere, and there were rows of cultivated dirt, but the plants were all uprooted. There was a holding pond lined with plastic sheeting along the stream, and there was a pile of sports drink bottles filled with a milky pink fluid next to it. Along the edges of the garden was what looked like homemade spike strips, thin boards with nails driven through them. I could smell the distinct smell of pot in the air. This was an illegal grow site. There had been enough news reports about what happens to people who come across these illegal grow sites for me to know that I needed to get away fast. I turned and I ran into the shrubs on the opposite side of the trail, hiding behind a crumbling tree stump. I checked my map to make sure I was heading into uneven terrain, where I would be unlikely to find another garden. The cars at the trailhead likely belonged to whoever was maintaining this garden, but since they weren't at this location, they were probably at another. I started to stand up, but dropped back down holding my position when I heard a pair of male voices talking in Spanish. I recognized a few words like mountain and up when they were talking, and they kept repeating, "Pi grande, pi grande." When their voices faded away, I quietly started to go in the opposite direction, putting distance between me and them. The map indicated that if I kept going east, there were no streams and there would be some decent elevation changes, but afterwards there was a forest road I could follow out. I walked straight through, maintaining an eastbound path for a half hour until I heard a soft wailing sound coming from the left of me. I stopped dead in my tracks. It sounded like nothing I've heard in the forest before. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human. I could smell a strange odor in the air, and I noticed some long tracks on the ground. They looked like a bear double step, but one side had splotchy blood in it. I grabbed my bear spray and knife out of my bag and stood still, looking around for the source of the noise. I took a couple of steps forward, and everything went silent. Suddenly, I felt something crash into my left side from the rear, knocking me to the ground. I looked up, terrified that it was a bear, but it looked like a massive man covered in dirty blonde hair and very tan skin. He grunted at me and then collapsed on the ground, his feet near my face. I could see a massive gash in the sole of his foot with pine needles and dirt sticking to the blood oozing out. I heard voices coming from the direction I had just come from. I wasn't sure if it was the same men, but I didn't want to risk it. I jumped up on my feet, smacked his leg, and said, "Go!" as loud as I dared. I started running east, and I heard his limping footsteps pounding on the ground heading slightly north of me. There was a hill ahead with several large boulders that I could somewhat see through the thick trees, and I kept running until I reached it. I climbed up the hill and I could smell that weird smell again. I followed the odor, and I found him collapsed on his back on the ground. He was taking short, rapid breaths. I could see that he had 2 holes in the far right side of his chest where there was blood oozing as well. He looked human, yet he didn't. He looked like he could kill me single-handed, but I had an overwhelming urge to help him. I knelt down beside him and grabbed his massive hand to try and check for his pulse. I could feel a strong beating under his skin, giving me hope. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to ask for help. I pulled the first aid kit out of my pack and looked at what I had, trying to figure out the best way to make what I had work. I keep my day kit light, carrying only things that will patch me up enough to get to help. I only had 2 hemostatic gauze pads, and the chest wounds were the most concerning. I put my ear near the wounds, listening for sucking sounds, then applied the gauze when I heard none. I applied pressure for several minutes, then ripped 2 pieces of kinesiology tape off of the roll to hold them there. His eyes were slightly open and watching me as I gestured for him to open his mouth. He closed his eyes with his mouth still shut. He could have indicated to me by now if he didn't want me touching him, so I went for it. I carefully pulled open his mouth to check his gums and tongue, keeping my fingers clear in case he decided to snap his mouth closed. His gums were dark, but his tongue was pink. I didn't see any signs that his lungs had been punctured, but when I looked at his teeth, they weren't quite like a human's. His canine teeth were larger, but not as oversized as a gorilla's. Once the critical injury was dressed, I went down to work on his foot, washing it gently with some water from my pack. He started moaning, lifting his head up and looking at me, but he didn't jerk his foot away. I did my best trying to clean it out, using one of my maxi pads to wipe away the debris and dry the skin. The cut was long, nearly an inch deep across most of it, and there was a hole on the top of his foot as well. His foot was very broad and flat, and the wound was trying to splay open. I filled the cut with ointment and used the tape to make massive butterfly strips to pull the 2 sides of the wound together, leaving drainage gaps between the strips. I left the hole on top uncovered to serve as a drain as well. I then took my last maxi pad and strapped it to the bottom of his foot like a sandal, using tape across the top. I looked back up at his face and I could see a small trickle of blood running on the ground by his head. I had missed a wound someplace. I went back to his side and pulled on his arm, hoping he would get the idea to roll over. He was too heavy for me to pull over without his help. Finally, he rolled onto his side, and I found 2 jagged exit wounds on his back about the size of my thumb. I didn't have much left in my first aid kit, but I did have several tampons. I opened up the tampon package and put the applicator in about an inch deep and inserted the tampon, leaving about a third of it outside of his body. I repeated this in the other hole, and then pulled on his arm to get him on his back to keep pressure on the tampons. Once he was flat again, he closed his eyes and his breathing slowed down. He seemed to be sleeping. I stayed there watching him for a few minutes and cleaning up my trash when I heard shots in the distance. I needed to get down to where I could find help, but I couldn't leave him exposed. My cell phone didn't have service at this point, so I needed to get down to the road. I didn't think it was likely whoever was shooting the gun would come up the hill, but I gathered up the few branches I could find and covered him with them, hoping he would stay sleeping until I came back. I started down the hill on the eastern side, heading towards the forest road. Once I hit the flat dirt, I ran south until I saw a truck heading down the road towards me. I could see the light bar on top and I felt so relieved. At that point I knew I was safe. The ranger pulled up to me and I broke down, relieved. I knew I couldn't come right out and talk about him. Instead, I told the ranger about the illegal grow, and I said that I saw a severely wounded bear with young cubs they had shot. It was a lie, but I needed him to go back with me and check on him, and he probably wouldn't believe me if I said what he really was. We drove back to the hill and we ascended where I hid him, the ranger following close behind me with his gun drawn. The ranger wanted me to follow behind, but just in case, I wanted to make sure I was the first face he saw. He likely wouldn't survive another gunshot wound, and if he slammed into the ranger like he did to me, the ranger would likely shoot. When I was able to see the top of the hill, I could see the branches, but he was gone. The blood from his back was still there, but the branches I had covered him with were arranged into an X on the ground. It's been 6 years since that day, but I feel like it was yesterday. Since I didn't see him get his injuries, I'll never know for certain what happened. I've read stories about them being protectors of the forest, and I think that's what he was doing. These illegal growers divert water from streams to grow pot, and their camping garbage brings a lot of wildlife to their gardens. They use highly potent and sometimes illegal rodenticides and insecticides, and large die-offs are common around grow sites, everything from birds to bears. It would make sense that he would want to push them out of his forest. I'm certain he was shot, and I think when he was running away he stepped on a spike strip and it ripped through his foot. I did my best to take care of him, and I wish I knew he was okay out there.